Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the strangest truths in all of human history, because the first prehistoric humans were never supposed to become the rulers of Earth. Think about it for a moment. Long before cities, before kingdoms, before money, before roads and screens and alarm clocks that ruined peaceful mornings, there were only small groups of humans standing in a world that looked absolutely terrifying. Imagine opening your eyes each morning without walls around you, without doors to lock, without knowing whether the day would end with food in your stomach or hunger twisting inside your chest. The world wasn't safe. The world wasn't comfortable. It wasn't designed for humans to dominate. In fact, if you looked around back then, humans probably seemed like one of the weaker creatures in the landscape. They didn't have claws like giant predators. They couldn't run as fast as horses. They had no sharp teeth, no thick fur to survive freezing temperatures, no giant wings, no armor, no poison. On paper, early humans looked like nature had forgotten to finish building them. Around them were enormous creatures that seemed far more impressive. Massive mammoths moved like living mountains across frozen plains. Giant predators waded in tall grass and dark forests. Bears stood taller than men. Saber-toothed cats carried weapons directly attached to their faces. Every direction looked dangerous. Every sound in the darkness meant something. A branch snapping wasn't just noise. It could mean life or death. Yet somehow, against every expectation, those fragile humans survived while many of the monsters around them disappeared forever. That's where the story becomes fascinating. Because early humans weren't physically stronger than the world around them. They were different. While other creatures relied on speed or strength, humans developed something unusual. They started relying on each other. Picture a hunting group standing together near a valley thousands of years ago. One person notices tracks in the dirt. Another recognizes broken branches. Someone points toward distant movement near the horizon. Slowly, information begins flowing between minds. Alone, each person sees only small pieces of the world. Together, they see patterns. Together, they see opportunities. Together, they become something larger than a single animal. That may have been humanity's greatest invention before tools, before agriculture, before civilization itself. Cooperation. Because a lone human in prehistoric times was vulnerable. But a group of humans thinking together became incredibly dangerous. Imagine hunting something enormous like a mammoth. No one runs directly toward a giant animal carrying sharp spears and optimism. That's not bravery. That's poor planning. Instead, they watched. They waited. They learned migration routes, animal behavior, seasonal patterns. They turned patience into strategy. Humans began using intelligence as a survival tool. They studied the world constantly. Which plants caused sickness and which healed wounds. Which sounds in the night signaled danger. Which rivers flooded and which remained safe. Knowledge became invisible protection. And once knowledge existed, it could be shared. Parents taught children. Elders taught hunters. Stories carried information further than memory alone ever could. Around campfires beneath ancient stars, people weren't just resting. They were transferring survival itself from one generation into another. Imagine sitting there beside a fire while cold winds move through distant trees. Sparks drift upward into darkness, while someone older points toward the sky and tells stories. Maybe those stories explained animals. Maybe they explained seasons. Maybe they warned children about dangerous places nearby. But beneath every story lived another purpose. Remember this, learn this, survive this. Those fires became schools long before schools existed. And perhaps that's what people misunderstand about prehistoric humans. They imagine grunting figures dragging clubs through caves. But reality was much more impressive. These people observed nature with extraordinary attention because mistakes carried consequences modern people rarely face. Today, if someone forgets directions, they open a map app. Early humans couldn't do that. If someone forgot where water existed during dry seasons, entire groups might suffer. Memory wasn't convenient. Memory was survival. And slowly, over thousands upon thousands of years, humans changed the world around them without even realizing it. Stone tools improved. Hunting methods improved. Communication improved. Social structures became stronger. Small ideas accumulated across generations, like drops of water slowly shaping stone. Nobody woke up and announced civilization was beginning. Change happened quietly. One improvement became another. One lesson became 10 more. One successful idea survived while bad ideas disappeared. That's evolution. Not only of bodies, but of thinking itself. And perhaps the strangest part of all is realizing that those prehistoric humans weren't looking toward the future the way we do now. They had no idea their descendants would someday build cities stretching into clouds. They couldn't imagine airplanes crossing oceans or lights glowing inside tiny devices held in people's hands. They weren't trying to create modern civilization. They were simply trying to survive until tomorrow morning. Yet every choice they made pushed humanity forward by tiny, invisible steps. Every fire they protected, every child they taught, every hunt they planned, every story they shared became another stone in a road leading toward us. Because humanity wasn't built by kings or emperors at first. Humanity was built by forgotten people whose names disappeared tens of thousands of years ago. People who stood beneath ancient skies, looked into darkness filled with predators, and somehow decided to keep moving forward anyway. The morning arrives slowly across the prehistoric world, not with alarms or phone notifications, but with cold air sliding over grass and pale sunlight stretching across endless land. Long before cities existed, mornings carried uncertainty. You open your eyes near fading embers from last night's fire, and immediately your mind begins asking survival questions. Is there food nearby? Did predators pass through during the night? Is the weather changing? Are the children safe? Modern people often begin mornings deciding between tea or coffee. Prehistoric humans began mornings deciding whether the day itself would cooperate. And despite what many imagine, these early humans weren't wandering randomly through landscapes hoping luck would save them. Survival by luck doesn't last thousands of years. Survival by observation does. Imagine a small group preparing for a hunt. Nobody simply grabs a spear and runs into the wilderness. Preparation starts quietly. Hunters examine footprints pressed into mud near water sources. Someone notices disturbed grass bending in one direction. Someone else recognizes claw marks on a tree. These details seem small, but for prehistoric people, details were everything. The land itself became a giant book constantly writing information across rivers, dirt, leaves, and animal movement. Early humans learned how to read it. In some ways, they understood landscapes better than modern people understand their own neighborhoods. They knew where herds migrated during different seasons. They knew which valleys trapped cold air and which hills offered safety. They remembered hidden water sources during dry months. Entire mental maps existed inside their minds without paper, without signs, without technology. Imagine carrying an entire world inside memory alone. Because getting lost wasn't inconvenient. Getting lost could become final. Then there was weather. Weather controlled almost everything. Today, rain can cancel plans. Back then, weather could erase entire food sources. A sudden drop in temperature meant danger. Strong winds might signal coming storms. Dark clouds gathering along distant horizons demanded attention. Prehistoric humans watched skies carefully because the sky often decided whether groups survived. They probably noticed subtle changes modern people ignore completely. Bird movement shifting unexpectedly. Animal behavior changing. Strange silence settling over forests. Nature constantly sent signals, and humans slowly learned how to listen. And while hunting receives most of the attention in prehistoric stories, gathering food mattered just as much, maybe more. Because not every day ended with giant animals collapsing dramatically beneath spears. Hunting carried risk and uncertainty. Plants, roots, berries, nuts, and edible vegetation often provided reliable nutrition, but gathering wasn't simple either. Imagine standing before dozens of similar-looking plants without books or labels explaining which one heals and which one kills. Knowledge mattered. One mistake could poison someone. So people learned. Mothers taught daughters. Elders taught children. Generations passed down invisible libraries stored entirely in memory. Knowledge traveled through people instead of paper. Somewhere a child asks questions while walking beside an elder through grasslands. Which berries are safe? Which roots help stomach pain? Which leaves should never be touched? The answers become survival gifts carried forward into future generations. And slowly, something else begins growing inside human groups beyond food and hunting strategies. Relationships. Because surviving beside the same people every day changes things. Humans weren't simply collections of individuals sharing space temporarily. They formed connections, friendships, loyalty, affection, grief, trust. Skeletal discoveries show ancient humans caring for injured individuals who couldn't hunt or travel easily. Some people lived years with severe injuries that should have made survival impossible alone. Broken bones healed, physical limitations remained visible, yet they survived anyway. Why? Because someone helped them, someone shared food, someone slowed down for them, someone protected them. Think about that for a moment. Compassion existed long before civilization. Long before laws or written religion or organized governments, humans already understood something important. Other people mattered. Survival wasn't purely strength. Survival was community. Because even then, humans were discovering a truth that still follows us today. Alone we survive for a while. Together, we survive much longer. And as evening approaches once more, an orange light stretches across prehistoric landscapes. Hunting groups return carrying stories from the day. Some return successful. Others return tired and empty-handed. Fires begin glowing again beneath darkening skies. Shadows dance across stone walls. Voices rise around warmth and safety, while stars slowly emerge overhead, one by one. And somewhere beneath those same stars, our ancestors sit together, unaware that tens of thousands of years later, their descendants would still be telling stories about them. Because they were never just primitive survivors wandering through history. They were building humanity itself without realizing it, one day at a time. Night settles over the prehistoric world with a kind of darkness modern humans almost never experience. There are no city lights glowing beyond hills, no distant traffic, no soft electric hum filling the background. Darkness here is complete, stretching across forests, rivers, mountains, and endless open plains. Fire becomes the center of existence itself. Around it, people gather naturally, not because someone tells them to, but because warmth means safety and light means survival. Beyond the circle of firelight, the world changes into something uncertain. Strange sounds emerge from the darkness. Leaves move without explanation. Branches crack somewhere beyond sight. Predators begin moving through the night, while unseen eyes may already be watching from distant shadows. A rustling sound in modern life might be ignored. In prehistoric life, ignoring the wrong sound could become your last mistake. Yet despite living beside constant danger, these early humans were not frozen by fear. They adapted to it. Fear became information instead of paralysis. Children learned early that every sound carried meaning. Wolves moved differently than deer. Wind through grass sounded different from movement caused by large animals. Survival depended on understanding tiny differences hidden inside ordinary noises. Imagine hearing footsteps in darkness and immediately knowing whether danger approached or whether dinner had just wandered closer. That level of awareness feels almost supernatural today. But for prehistoric humans, it was simply normal life. Around the fire, the atmosphere changes as tension slowly fades. Hunting tools rest beside their owners. Spears lean against rocks. Animal hides wrap around shoulders as cold air moves across the camp. And now, something equally important begins. Stories. Because long before writing existed, stories became humanity's first library. Information needed somewhere to live. There were no books waiting on shelves, no phones carrying endless knowledge, no maps folded into pockets. Memory became civilization before civilization existed. Imagine an older hunter leaning toward flickering flames while children sit nearby listening carefully. He speaks about rivers beyond distant hills, where animals gather during warm seasons. He explains dangerous territories where giant predators hunt. He describes weather patterns, edible plants, hidden water sources. But information alone isn't enough. Humans remember stories better than instructions. So survival knowledge becomes wrapped inside narratives. Heroes appear, animals speak, spirits move through forests, lessons hide inside adventures. Maybe children laugh during certain parts while staring wide-eyed during others. But later, when they grow older, they remember. That's the magic of stories. Information enters through emotion and stays there. Some stories likely explain things no one truly understood. Why does thunder shake the sky? Why does winter arrive? Why do stars move overhead each night? Humans naturally search for meaning. Even without science, curiosity survives. Perhaps prehistoric people looked upward and imagined giant animals running across heaven. Maybe spirits carried sunlight away every evening before returning it each morning. We don't know every answer, but we know something important. Humans everywhere eventually create explanations because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Questions demand something. And around fires beneath ancient skies, humanity probably gave those question stories before giving them science. Music likely joined these moments too. Archaeologists discovered bone, flutes thousands upon thousands of years old, meaning somewhere during prehistoric nights, people sat exactly like this and created melodies. Think about how remarkable that is. In a world where daily survival required enormous effort, humans still found time for music. Someone carefully carved holes into bone not to hunt more effectively, not to survive winter more easily, but simply because sound mattered, rhythm mattered, emotion mattered. Imagine soft flute notes rising into cold, night air while sparks drift upward toward stars. Maybe people sang together. Maybe children danced near fires while adults smiled. Maybe grief found expression through melodies after losing loved ones. Because humans have always carried emotions larger than words alone can hold. Joy needed somewhere to go. Sadness needed somewhere to go. Music gave emotions shape. And slowly, while sitting around these fires, another invisible thing develops across generations. Identity. Groups begin seeing themselves as something larger than individual people sharing temporary space. Shared memories form. Shared traditions emerge. Certain places become meaningful. Certain stories become sacred. Certain rituals begin repeating themselves. Maybe before hunts, specific actions happen every time. Maybe certain songs belong only to particular moments. Maybe stars become connected to ancestors watching overhead. These things may seem small, but they become foundations for everything that follows later in human history. Religion, culture, nations, families, traditions, they all begin with humans creating meaning together. Firelight flickers across faces while distant animals call somewhere beyond sight. Children eventually grow sleepy beside warmth. Adults stare silently toward darkness beyond camp borders. Tomorrow will bring uncertainty again. Food must still be found. Weather will still change. Predators will still exist. But tonight, there is warmth, safety, stories, and other people nearby. And perhaps that's when one of humanity's oldest realizations quietly begins forming, without anyone speaking it aloud. Survival alone keeps bodies alive, but connection gives life meaning. Tens of thousands of years later, we still gather around glowing lights, still tell stories, still listen to music, still search for belonging. The surroundings changed. The technology changed. But the humans sitting around the fire never really disappeared. They simply became us. And now our journey slowly reaches its final fire of the night. Because as we stand at the edge of the prehistoric world and look back, something strange begins to happen. The people we imagined as distant suddenly don't feel distant at all. At the beginning of the story, it was easy to picture them as rough figures moving through caves and wilderness, carrying spears beneath cold skies, while living in a world completely separated from our own. But the deeper we traveled, the more that illusion started breaking apart. Because prehistoric humans were never simply surviving. They were becoming. They were learning, adapting, dreaming, loving, fearing, and creating the first invisible pieces of everything we now call civilization. Somewhere thousands upon thousands of years ago, a child sat beside a fire asking questions that sound surprisingly familiar even now. What's beyond those mountains? Why do stars move? What happens after death? Why does thunder shake the sky? Curiosity did not begin in classrooms. Curiosity began long before buildings existed. It began in human minds staring into mysteries beneath ancient stars. Imagine the countless forgotten people whose names disappeared forever. The mother gathering plants while teaching her child which berries healed and which berries harmed. The injured hunter whose group refused to leave him behind. The elders sharing stories while flames reflected inside curious eyes. The person who first shaped a stone tool differently and accidentally improved it. The musician carving holes into bone simply because silence felt incomplete. The artist pressing painted hands against cave walls, unknowingly leaving messages for people tens of thousands of years in the future. None of them knew history would remember humanity. None of them knew cities would rise, kingdoms would fall, machines would fly across oceans, or people would someday hold entire libraries inside glowing screens. They weren't building our world intentionally. They were simply trying to survive another season, another winter, another sunrise. Yet every small choice moved humanity forward, every lesson shared beside a campfire, every child protected, every successful hunt, every act of compassion. Every idea passed from one mind into another became a tiny thread woven into a fabric that eventually became us. And maybe that is the most beautiful part of all, because history often focuses on kings and empires and famous names carved into stone. But humanity itself wasn't built by famous people.